and their talent too. I'd love to be able to sing like that, but I don't. So, but I can still wish. So we're here today to celebrate Easter, and so glad that so many of you could come. It's good to see you here. And we're so glad now that we can be here and that the doors are opening up everywhere again. People are beginning to travel again, and we're just going to claim that this pandemic is going away. Let's just claim that, okay? Let's claim that. So the Easter of our lives is the title of the talk, and a lot of times during the week, I will have selected a title, and then I'll think about what I'm going to say, and I could change it several times, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's okay. What I've decided to do today is tell several stories. But first, I want to explain why I originally chose the title, The Easter of Our Lives. And we do know that Easter is typically when there has been a passing on of, let's say we've had a winter, and now we have a spring and rebirth. And I have over the years not wanted to use the word resurrection as much because I think I associated it so much with my youth and some of the teachings that I remember of the need to repent and being saved and sin and all the negative words that went along with it. So let's just say Easter is a time of rebirth. And as a matter of fact, we all know, and I've reminded you several times in case you had forgotten, that the Christian church did take many of its practices from the earlier pagans and from the goddesses and of rebirth, and they were combined. And so these are just earth practices of rebirth, like two turtles in your garden. So beautiful. So what did Jesus do? He came to the earth to teach us how to be. Jesus really didn't teach any doctrine. He told stories. He told parables. And the way he felt that he could get through to people was to tell them stories, and they could understand that. There was no doctrine, certainly no dogma that went along with his teachings. So I'm going to talk this morning about some stories of how I believe Jesus would be and what he would teach us if he were here today. And one of the things that strikes me most when reading about his short career at teaching, and did you know it was only 3 years? It wasn't long, was it? Is how much he loved children. And that's why I've asked the children to stay in here this morning. It's because I have some stories that I think are going to mean something to you. And I asked Miss Snay if she would stay in. And by the way, thank you for all you do for the community. Nay, not just the children. The neighborhood and the way of that big party you provided yesterday. Understand it was a big hit. And all the food was gone by the end. Isn't that a blessing? Don't you just love that? So what I'm going to do today is talk about a couple of children's stories before I move on to some others. But Jesus said, "Allow the little children to come to me. allow them to come to me, he said. He didn't push them away like some of his friends would have done. He thought the children were bothering him and they're trying to shoo them away. He says, no, let them come to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these teachings. One story I shared yesterday, and Alicia commented on it. She really loved it, so I'm going to repeat it today, if that's okay. Does everyone know who Corrie ten Boom was? Many of you do. She was arrested from the Netherlands. She and her family hid people during the Holocaust, and they were finally caught and arrested. But she tells the sweetest story. She said, you see, when I was a youngster, there was this line that was stuck in my head, and I couldn't get it out. It had to do with sex, she said. I was pretty sure it meant whether you were a boy or a girl, and sin, that my auntie teacher would say when she was very angry, but what the two words together meant, the way she would use them, I couldn't imagine. She said, so I was seated next to my father in the train compartment. I suddenly asked, Father, what is sex sin? He turned to look at me as he always did when answering a question. He always gave us his undivided attention, she said. But to my surprise, he said nothing for a moment. At last, he stood up. He lifted his traveling case from the rack over our heads, and he set it on the floor. He said to me, will you carry it off the train, Corrie? Well, she said, I got up, I stood, I tugged at it, but it was so heavy. It was crammed with the watches and the spare parts he had purchased that morning. He was a watchmaker. She said, it's too heavy. Yes, he said, and it would be a pretty poor father who would ask his little girl to carry such a load. It's the same way, Corrie, with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you're older and stronger, you can bear it. But for now, you must trust me to carry it for you. Isn't that sweet? What a man. That's from the book, The Hiding Place, The Triumphant Story of Corrie ten Boom. We're asking our children sometimes to carry loads that are too heavy for them. They should not be forced as children to see and feel the world through the lens of adults, should they? Shouldn't they be allowed to be children? Innocence is worth protecting and worth fighting for. We need to do our part as parents and caregivers to carry certain things for them until they're old enough to carry the load. We must make sure that they are receiving the needed time and space for growing and becoming healthy adults. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir out there this morning or singing to the choir because many of you were asked to grow up way too soon. I know you were. And if you were, I would ask you in your spare time, at times, to allow yourself the time to be a child again and retrieve that child, that innocent child, and set it free. Excuse me just a second. Janet, I see a couple of people shivering up here. Would you mind turning the thermostat up just a little? We don't want to freeze you out. And Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me. Do not hinder them." And there are few things in life that are as precious as a little child. Are there? There's another story about a little child, and this was from Sarajevo, not too many years back. A reporter who was covering the violence there in the middle of the city saw a little girl fatally shot. A man picked her up and came running to him and said, "Please get us to the hospital as soon as you can. Please." So he got a car, doesn't know whose car, but he remembers driving it and getting them to the hospital. And from the back seat, the man says, "Oh, my child is still breathing. Hurry, would you? Get us to the hospital." Oh, he says a few minutes later, "My child is still warm. Hurry, would you? Get us to the hospital." And then as they got to the hospital and it was clear the child was dead, they went in, and after the child was pronounced dead, back in the clinic, the doctor came and spoke to the reporter and said, "Would you let the father know?" He said, "Of course I will." So he went to the man that carried the child so lovingly. He said, "I'm so sorry. Your child has passed on." And the man was just stricken with grief. He says, "Now I must go tell the father." The reporter says, "I thought you were the father. You cared so much, so lovingly for this child." And the man says to him in response, "Aren't they all our children? Every single one. Aren't they all our children?" Indeed. Aren't they all our children? It's a question that deserves an answer. And we must do our part to make sure that the children are cared for and loved. Aren't they all our children? There may be no greater question for our generation, and how we answer that question will determine the shape of the world to come. I guarantee it. We don't want to see any more Hitlers, any more dictators that want to take over the world, do we? Let's start with the children. We must start there. There's a difference between education and experience. Education is what you get from reading the small print. Experience is what you get from not reading it. We've all done that, haven't we? Unfortunately. So there was a young teacher, and he said one night he had a dream. And in the dream, he saw that he had a very important mission in front of him. And he was told that he was going to have a student coming to him that was going to be a great personage in the world. You're to teach this person everything you can, he was told, about becoming a strong person, a good person, a person that will be upstanding and always, always, always do the right thing. Not think that they're all self-important, but to see everyone as being important and do the right thing. So the young teacher awoke in a sweat. He said it never occurred to him before that any one of his present or future students could be the person described in his dream. Was he preparing them to rise to any position, to go where they might aspire? He wondered, thought, no. How could his teaching change? He gradually began to formulate a plan in his mind. He knew that this student would need experience as well as instruction. She would need to know how to solve problems of any kind. She would need to become knowledgeable, but more than that, she would also need to stand firmly on strong values and grow in character. She would need self-assurance, as well as the ability to listen. She would need to know the value of lifelong learning in order to keep a curious and an active mind. You know, once we believe we know it all, that's when we cease to learn, right? She would need to grow in understanding of others, become a student of the Spirit. She would need to set high standards for herself and learn self-discipline. His teaching changed. Every young person that came through his door became for him a future world leader. Isn't that amazing? He saw each one not as they were, but as they could be. He expected the best from his students, yet he tempered it with gentleness. He taught each as if the future of the world depended on his instruction. Isn't that wonderful? And then years later, a woman he knew rose to a position of world prominence. He realized that she must surely have been the young girl described in the dream. And the only thing he didn't know is that the young girl would be his daughter, his very own daughter. But think of the gift he gave all those other hundreds of students that came into his classroom because of that one dream. I've heard it said that children are living messages we send to a time and place we will never see. I'm going to repeat that, okay? Children are living messages we send to a time and place we will never see. So with all these stories about children this morning, I hope the one thing that you will remember is that each and every one of us can make a difference. And we may make a difference through a child, through someone else who makes a difference through a child, and we can change the world in that way. So there's another really sweet story, and I'm glad I have time to tell it because it is just so sweet. Little girl named Skylar. You're going to love her. Now, children, listen, okay? In case you've drifted off, listen. I know I drift off sometimes, so I'm just saying it's easy to do. So her mother took her to the store to buy some Christmas presents. You see, she'd been saving up all year to buy some special Christmas presents. But she had seen on the television the week before an announcement about a local homeless shelter. It was called the Roadhouse. So she just repeatedly asked her mother, could she spend her money buying a child at the Roadhouse some special gifts. The concept of people being in such physical need, you see, deeply touched this child. So her mother took her to the store to buy those Christmas gifts. And instead of buying anything for herself or her family, you see, they didn't need anything. They had everything they needed, everything. So she knew that she wanted to use her money to buy something special for a little girl at the shelter. And so her mom had found out there was a little girl about her age. And so they learned more about her size. And so she took her money, she purchased her a warm coat, some socks, some gloves, and some crayons for this little girl. But when she discovered she didn't have enough money, she left a little doll behind. She so wanted to give the little girl that baby, she called it, but she left it behind because she knew she had a special one at home, and she was going to wrap it up and give it to the little girl. So she could hardly wait for Christmas. She wasn't thinking about Santa Claus or any presents she might be getting. She was thinking only about going to the shelter and giving her carefully selected gifts to a little girl she had never met. So on Christmas Eve, she and her family finally made this trip that Skylar had been anticipating for so long. They drove to the shelter, and there she presented her Christmas box to a grateful child. She was so filled with joy at touching someone else's life that her family decided to make that journey every year thereafter. No more gifts for each other. They were going to spend the money on others more needy. Nobel laureate John Nash, from A Beautiful Mind, some of you may remember that book or movie, said, "Perhaps it's good to have a beautiful mind, but an even greater gift is to have a beautiful heart." And I think that's what we're here to do today, is remind each other what resurrection, rebirth are all about. It's about becoming a new you. And that's why I titled my talk, The Easter of Our Lives. Every time you decide that you're going to become a better person, you're reborn. Every time you decide that you're going to change one thing to make the world a better place, you're reborn. And I would just encourage each of you today, embrace those moments, every single Easter moment that you can have to make your life a better, the world a better place, and maybe just make a difference in the life of one child. Now I hope you go have a lovely Easter lunch and do one thing for me today. Love yourself, and if you would, do one kind act for another.